What exactly do I want my students to learn? And at what level? These are the most basic questions that every educator asks themselves before every session. As an aspiring educator, you must understand that good or effective teaching is not just about delivering content. It's about designing learning. And one of the most powerful tools that helps educators to do exactly that is Bloom's taxonomy. Hi, welcome back to the UGC NET Paper 1 lecture series. I'm Deepthi, a psychologist and a NET qualified academician. Today, I'm going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy. Let's dive in. Bloom's taxonomy is a widely recognized hierarchical framework of learning objectives proposed by Benjamin Samuel Bloom, an American educational psychologist, along with a team of educators in 1956. Educational institutions and educators use this taxonomy to define instructional objectives, set teaching learning goals, structure curricula, and align assessment and evaluation effectively. In fact, any learner, despite what they are learning, can achieve mastery using this framework. For this reason, Bloom's taxonomy is also referred to as levels of learning. It encompasses 3 domains of learning: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. In the original version proposed by Benjamin Samuel Bloom, the hierarchy used nouns to represent different levels of learning. In contrast, the revised version developed by Krathwohl and Anderson in 2001 uses active verbs to emphasize learner engagement, active participation, and the application of knowledge. Let's look at each domain in detail. First, the cognitive domain. The cognitive domain focuses on the development of mental abilities, essentially the learner's knowledge and thinking skills. It has 6 levels. The first and the very bottom level of the cognitive domain is named as knowledge in the original version and remember in the revised version. At this level, the focus is on factual knowledge. Here, educators should design objectives, curricula, and evaluation methods that help learners recall and recognize facts. And at the end of this level, the learner should be able to remember facts accurately. Evaluation can be done using terms list, recite, outline, define, name, match, quote, recall, identify, label, recognize, tell, find, so on and so forth. For example, naming chemical elements on the periodic table, remembering historical dates, memorizing mathematical symbols, formulas, or tables, etc. Next, the second level of the cognitive domain. It is named as comprehension in the original version and understand in the revised version. At this level, the focus is on conceptual knowledge. Here, educators should guide students to understand concepts deeply and interpret their meaning rather than just memorizing facts. And at the end of this level, the learner should be able to grasp and explain ideas in their own words. Evaluation can be done at this stage using terms describe, explain, paraphrase, restate, summarize, contrast, interpret, discuss, and on and on. For example, summarizing theories, explaining a concept, interpreting a diagram, etc. Now, the third level of the cognitive domain. It is named as application in the original version and apply in the revised version. At this level, the focus is on procedural knowledge. Here, educators should provide practical context and real-life scenarios so that learners are able to utilize learned information in new situations. At the end of this level, the learner should be able to apply concepts, methods, or procedures to solve problems or perform tasks. And evaluation at this stage can be done using the terms calculate, predict, apply, solve, illustrate, use, demonstrate, determine, model, perform, present, and so on. For example, solving mathematical problems. using rules in practical situations, conducting laboratory experiments, etc. Next, the fourth level of the cognitive domain. It is named as analysis in the original version and analyze in the revised version. At this level, the focus is on metacognitive knowledge, which means gaining awareness and understanding of their own thought processes. Here, educators should guide students to break down complex information into parts and examine relationships or identify underlying patterns. And at the end of this level, the learner should be able to analyze information, recognize connections and distinctions, and draw informed insights. Evaluations at this stage can be done using terms classify, break down, categorize, analyze, diagram, illustrate, criticize, simplify, associate, and more of the same. For example, comparing theories, analyzing research data, etc. Now the fifth level of the cognitive domain. It is named as synthesis in the original version and evaluate in the revised version. At this level, the focus is on metacognitive knowledge again. Here, the educators guide the learners to judge information based on criteria and standards and also foster their creativity. Evaluations are done using the terms choose, support, relate, determine, defend, judge, grade, compare, contrast, argue, justify, convince, select, evaluate, develop, and so on. For example, evaluating a research design, judging the validity of an argument, defending a viewpoint, etc. Here comes the sixth level, the last and the highest level of the cognitive domain, which is named as evaluation in the original version and create in the revised version. Here also, the focus is on metacognitive knowledge. Educators prepare the learners to combine and evaluate knowledge to form new ideas or solutions. At this stage, evaluations can be done using the terms design, formulate, build, invent, create, compose, generate, derive, modify, develop, so on and so forth. For example, designing a research proposal, developing original hypothesis, creating a model, etc. As you see in Bloom's original taxonomy, synthesis or create came before evaluation, while in the revised version, create comes after evaluation. However, the Bloom's taxonomy framework is designed like a pyramid, meaning the levels are progressive, and suggesting that learners must master lower level skills before moving to higher levels. That covers the cognitive domain. Next, the affective domain. Proposed by Krathwohl in 1964, it focuses on the development of emotions and values. It describes how learners deal with feelings, emotions, and ethical values and shaping their behavior, attitudes, motivation, and interpersonal relationships. Basically, it focuses on self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and social skills. There are 5 levels here. The first and the lowest level is receiving. The objective here is to include activities that improve attentiveness. At the end of this level, the learner shows awareness and willingness to hear new ideas. For example, listening in peer presentations or lectures, acknowledging the importance of safety rules, etc. Next, the second level, responding. The goal here is to include activities that encourage participation. At the end of this level, the learner actively participates and engages with the learning process. For example, asking questions, contributing to discussions, volunteering to help with a project. And the third level is valuing. The goal here is to provide tasks that help students attach importance to values. At the end of this level, the learner will be able to internalize, appreciate, and respect values. For example, express respect for diverse perspectives during debates or collaborative work. showing empathy to others, etc. Next, the fourth level, organizing. The goal for educators here is to mentor students to align personal values with ethical principles. At the end, the learner integrates new values into their existing value system. For example, resolving conflicts, formulating a personal philosophy, or prioritizing tasks based on personal interest. The last and the highest level, characterizing. The objective for educators here is to encourage students to practice values consistently. And at the end, the learner consistently embodies internalized values in their everyday behavior. Values become a part of their life. For example, showing unwavering commitment to honor moral, ethical, and spiritual values, displaying self-reliance, essentially being truthful, responsible, and dependable in both personal and professional contexts. That's about the affective domain. Now the last domain, the psychomotor domain. It is also called as the kinesthetic domain. It emphasizes the development of physical coordination, motor skills, and reflexive actions. It enables learners to manipulate tools, instruments, or perform tasks ranging from basic reflexes to complex actions. And the mastery here improves speed, precision, strength, endurance, agility, and overall motor control. There are various models out there to describe psychomotor domain, but my personal favorite is the one proposed by Dave in 1975. It includes 5 levels. The lowest and the first level is imitation. The objectives are demonstration, modeling, and guided practice. Here, the educators let learners observe and copy basic motor activities demonstrated by them with guidance. It helps to develop sensory awareness and basic coordination. For example, basic hand exercises, throwing or catching balls, copying simple dance steps. Next, the second level. It is known as manipulation. The objectives are structured practice, step-by-step instructions, and feedback. Here, learners perform tasks by memory or by following step-by-step verbal or written instructions with minimal assistance. It helps to gain basic proficiency. For example, acting out a scene in a drama, performing a simple dance routine, assembling simple models. And the third level is precision. The goals are skill refinement, accuracy checks, and performance feedback. So here, learners execute motor skills accurately and independently, showing consistency and reduced errors. For example, knitting or sewing, typing accurately, playing a musical instrument with a proper technique, etc. Now, the fourth level, articulation. The objectives here are sequencing skills, coordination, and task integration. Here, learners combine multiple skills smoothly to perform coordinated actions for complex tasks. For example, performing a choreographed dance, playing in a sports team, etc. The last and the highest level is naturalization. The objectives are mastery, fluency, and real-world application. Here, the learners perform actions automatically, efficiently, and intuitively. The skill becomes their second nature. For example, swimming, typing without looking at the keyboard, riding a cycle, etc. You don't learn cycling by reading a book, right? You fall, you try, and one day your body just knows. That's how psychomotor domain works. So the entire framework is designed in such a way that the lower levels require lower order thinking skills, while the higher levels require higher order thinking skills. In exams, you get questions to classify a task as requiring lower order thinking skills or higher order thinking skills. Just remember, the more complex and open-ended the task, the higher the thinking skill involved. And finally, here is my secret tip. When I think of Bloom's taxonomy, I see it as a beautiful triple-H framework. Head, heart, and hands framework. Because the cognitive domain works in the head, the affective domain in the heart, and the psychomotor domain in the hands. We think through the cognitive domain to develop our mental abilities. From remember to create something meaningful. We feel and value through the affective domain and act and practice through the psychomotor domain. A commonly used mnemonic to remember the levels are, for the cognitive domain, RUA-AEC, affective domain, RRVOC, psychomotor domain, IMPAN. But my versions are, for the cognitive domain, real understanding always allows evaluation and creation. For the affective domain, receive or respond, values organize character. And finally, for the psychomotor domain, I make perfect art naturally. Cool, right? So, go ahead, learn it, remember it, and apply it in your life. Because when learning flows through the head, heart, and hands together, mastery doesn't feel forced. It happens naturally. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.